It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a milestone I had anticipated for years. My son Alex was about to graduate high school, and everything in our home felt right. The walls, though weathered, held memories of decades past. Photographs of our family lined the mantel, alongside trophies from Alex's childhood, each a testament to the years that had flown by. The smell of dinner, a comforting mix of freshly baked bread and roasted chicken, lingered in the air. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of distant traffic were the only noises that filled the quiet house. Mary, my wife, and I sat together at the dinner table, enjoying a simple meal, the calm before the storm. Mary looked as beautiful as ever, her dark hair perfectly styled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. As I adjusted my tie, she smiled at me. "Your tie is crooked," she said, gently fixing it. Her voice held that warmth, that easy affection that I had come to cherish. I smiled back. "Thanks. How do I look?" I asked, grinning. "Like the proud father you are," she replied, brushing off her apron and standing to clear the table. Her lightheartedness, her quiet grace, made everything seem so perfect. I couldn't have imagined the storm that was about to sweep through our lives. I watched her move about the kitchen, a quiet contentment settling over me. I felt so incredibly fortunate. I had a wife who loved me, a son who was turning into a fine young man, and a life others would envy. But as I glanced at Mary again, something shifted in the air. It was subtle, just a flicker of unease in the way she carried herself, in the fleeting glance she gave me. There was a strain there, just beneath the surface. I couldn't place it, but I couldn't ignore it either. I tried to push it aside. After all, we were about to celebrate Alex's graduation, a proud moment that had been years in the making. But the nagging feeling lingered, like a shadow in the corner of my mind, refusing to let go. For weeks now, I'd noticed changes in Mary, small, quiet changes that I had been too blind to fully see. She had grown distant, withdrawn. There were excuses for why she spent more time away from home, always on the phone, always with some vague reason. Her phone, once left unattended, was now a constant companion. She would retreat behind its screen whenever I entered the room. And the late-night messages, those brief moments of hesitation when I asked about them, the way her face would stiffen, her eyes quickly swiping them away. At first, I chalked it up to stress, Alex's graduation, life in general, but the signs became harder to ignore. The perfume that lingered on a shirt that wasn't mine. The way she would avoid certain questions about her day, as though there was something she didn't want me to know. Each small detail gnawed at me, but I refused to believe it. Not Mary. Not her. She was the one person I trusted above all else. She had always been my rock. But slowly, that trust began to slip, as though the foundation beneath me was eroding, inch by inch. The discovery, as so many devastating truths do, came by accident. One afternoon, while Mary was out, I found her phone left behind on the kitchen counter. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for it, an unsettling mix of dread and curiosity filling me. I knew I shouldn't look, knew it could shatter everything, but I couldn't resist. I unlocked the phone, my hands trembling. The Messages app opened, and my eyes locked onto the thread at the top. The name was unfamiliar. But the words, they hit me like a ton of bricks. "I miss you. I can't stop thinking about you. When will you be home?" I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't think, as I read the next message, then the next, each one more intimate, more damning than the last. There were pictures, too, photos that made my stomach turn. They were too personal, too private. My chest tightened, the weight of it all crashing down around me. I stumbled back, barely able to keep my footing, the phone still in my hand. It was as though the room had gone silent. My mind raced, but all I could focus on were the words, the images. My thoughts were swirling, a storm of disbelief and pain. The name at the end of the conversation pierced me like a dagger, David. A man I didn't recognize, but who seemed to know everything about my life, about my family. About Alex. My heart shattered as the pieces of our life, our love, began to fall apart, one cruel message at a time. I didn't need to ask who he was, the evidence was clear as day. I had stumbled upon the betrayal, and it gnawed at me with every breath I took. There was no more waiting, no more avoiding the inevitable. The confrontation had to happen, and tonight, Alex's graduation night, would be the moment it all came to a head. The house buzzed with excitement, laughter, and conversation as guests filtered in. But inside, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. The truth of what I had discovered, the dark seed of betrayal that had been growing beneath the surface for months, festered in my chest. I couldn't shake it, couldn't escape the weight of it. I found Mary in the kitchen, her back turned as she made final preparations for the evening. For a moment, I stood in the doorway, watching her. She looked so serene, so composed, but to me, she was a stranger. The woman I once loved, the woman I trusted, now stood before me as the one who had deceived me in ways I couldn't have imagined. "Mary," I said, my voice low, but heavy with something darker. It trembled with a mix of rage and heartbreak. She turned, startled by the coldness in my tone. Her smile faltered when she saw the look in my eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice coated with a false sweetness that only fueled the fire burning inside me. "I know," I said flatly. "About David." Her face went pale, the color draining from it as her eyes widened in disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You think I'm stupid?" I continued, stepping closer, my voice rising, now full of accusation. "You think I wouldn't notice the late nights, the secret phone calls, the way you've been slipping away from me for months? You think I wouldn't find out?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. "Not now. Not after everything she had done." "I never meant for it to happen," she stammered, her voice trembling. I couldn't let her finish. "Don't lie to me," I shouted, the anger breaking free, my voice echoing through the house. "You've been sleeping with him behind my back, and now you expect me to just sit here and act like everything's fine?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow, meaningless, as empty as the space between us. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of more guests. But something inside me snapped. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not after everything I had done for her, for this family. I stepped back, fists clenched, fighting the urge to explode. I needed to think. I needed a plan. But above all, I needed to make them pay. The days that followed blurred into one long string of tension and calculation. My mind raced with ideas, schemes, revenge, ways to make them both suffer. David, the man who had stolen my wife, was a threat, a challenge I wouldn't let go unpunished. And Mary, she was just as guilty. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wasn't going to play the victim anymore. I started small, subtle, whispers here, rumors there. The kinds of things that could tear a reputation apart without anyone ever knowing who started it. By the time I was done, David's reputation was shattered. His once thriving business began to crumble under the weight of scandal and distrust. The people he'd once called friends started to distance themselves. I made sure of it, using every weapon I had in my arsenal. But Mary was different. Her punishment would be far greater than a ruined reputation. I wasn't done with her yet. She would feel the full weight of her actions in a way she would never forget. And then, the night of Alex's graduation arrived. The air was thick with excitement, yet all I could focus on was the man who had the audacity to be here. David, the man who had thought he could replace me. He stood confidently, his smug grin never faltering, as he prepared to make his toast. The room grew quiet as he raised his glass. "To the man who raised my boy for me," he said, his voice filled with an air of superiority that made my blood boil. For a moment, everything felt frozen, like the calm before a storm. And then, Alex stood up beside him. He wasn't smiling. His face was set, his eyes cold. "You think you're my father?" Alex asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "I have something to say that will change everything." The room erupted into chaos as Alex dropped the bombshell. The truth, his biological father wasn't David. It was someone else entirely. My stomach churned as the truth unfurled before my eyes. The lies, the manipulation, the deceit, all of it came crashing down in that moment, leaving Mary and David standing there, broken, their lives unraveling in front of us. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated had been more effective than I could have imagined. But as I looked back on everything I'd done, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? Some betrayals don't break us, they build us into something stronger. But at what cost? If you think justice was served, subscribe for more tales of betrayal, revenge, and the twisted paths we take to reclaim what's ours.